Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start, as usual, with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome to today's Sutta class. The last few weeks we have been talking about the 5 hindrances, and especially last week we read the sutta together where the Buddha recommended specific antidotes for each hindrance. Like if you're struggling with one hindrance, what kind of meditations, what kind of contemplations can you do in order to sort of counteract that hindrance and over time to slowly dissolve it and get rid of that particular problem. And so last time we briefly went through all of the 5 hindrances and we briefly talked about those antidotes. And so, for example, for the first hindrance, sensual desire, the suggested remedy was to develop the perception of the sign of the repulsive. So to do various contemplations or meditations on the nature of the body, for example, on death, on the corpse contemplations, or on repulsiveness of food, or whatever sensual object that you feel attracted to, and to see all the drawbacks, see the dangers, and in this way be able to let go of that attachment. And for the second hindrance, ill will, or anger, or hatred, or aversion, or whatever form the ill will comes in, the recommended antidote is the practice of the Brahma Viharas, especially the practice of metta meditation, so loving kindness meditation. And so we briefly went through all of these different methods, but I thought we should maybe dedicate a full session for each of that, like how to specifically practice that, what are different methods, what are like different techniques, so that you like get an overview and maybe you get some different ideas of how to practice this particular thing from different angles. Because for some people, one technique doesn't work, so they might want to try another technique or something like that. And so I thought today we are going to have a look at the Brahma Viharas and especially at metta practice, because I think the hindrance that most people struggle with most is the hindrance of ill will or anger. And that is a hindrance that causes so much suffering and that causes so many problems and so much conflict. So a lot of people struggle with that, and a lot of people can see that this is suffering, and a lot of people actually want to do something about this. So metta practice is really, really powerful, a very powerful tool. And today we want to talk about that. And I think most people will be familiar with the way modern teachers teach metta, and most people will know that different teachers teach metta in different ways. So for example, one method that is really, really popular is that you start with a person that is close to you, a loved one, and you try to generate metta for that person. Or other teachers might recommend that you start with yourself, and then you go to a neutral person, then you go to an enemy, and so on. So you pick different objects for your metta practice. Or another method that is quite popular nowadays is to start with people that are around you, people in the same room, then people in the same house, the same village, the same town, the same country, and then the whole earth and the whole universe. And so you gradually expand the circle of your metta outwards. That's another method. Other teachers recommend you start with a teddy bear or a puppy. So there are so many different methods. But today I wanted to have a look what the Buddha actually said. So what the kind of techniques for metta practice that I mentioned in the early suttas. Because it's very interesting, metta practice obviously has been practiced for the last 2,500 years. or probably even before the time of the Buddha, so much longer than that. And over this time, metta practice has evolved quite a bit. And a lot of monks and nuns have written on metta, and a lot of people have developed techniques for practicing metta. But most of the techniques that are taught nowadays actually go back to the commentarial literature, not necessarily to the early suttas. So I think it's quite interesting to have a look what the suttas actually say about metta practice. So the first sutta that I want to read with you is the standard passage for the description of the Brahma Viharas that the Buddha gives over and over and over again in the suttas. So I have put a link to Anguttara Nikaya 3.66, to Bhante Sucharto's translation. I could have picked like so many other suttas because this passage is all over the canon, but I've picked this particular one. So this is the standard passage that the Buddha has used many times. So I thought this would be a good starting point. And so this is what we're going to have a look first. So if you follow the link, it should take you straight to the middle of the sutta where that passage about the Brahma Viharas is. So this sutta is called the Salha Sutta because the Buddha talks with a person named Salha. And he gives instructions at the beginning of the sutta. And then the Buddha comes to the point where he teaches about the Brahma Vihara practice. So this is, on Sutta Central, this numbering is Sutta Central sort of paragraph number 46.1. As I mentioned, if you follow the link, it should have taken you right there already. And the Buddha says the following. Then that noble disciple is rid of desire, rid of ill will, unconfused, aware, and mindful. They meditate, spreading a heart full of love, full of compassion, full of rejoicing, or full of equanimity, to one direction, and to the second, and to the third, and to the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of Metta, or one of the other Brahma Viharas, to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. So I think this passage is familiar to many people. This is, as I mentioned, the standard passage. And in this particular sutta, it starts with the Buddha introducing the practice by saying that the practitioner is already rid of desire, rid of ill will, unconfused, aware, and mindful before they start doing this metta practice. So obviously that is quite a high standard. This requires that you have already gotten rid of most of the hindrances in your mind. You've gotten rid of all sensual desire. You've gotten rid of ill will. You're perfectly mindful. You're perfectly aware and unconfused. So obviously for most people, when they sit down for meditation, this is not the kind of mind that they will have. For most people, there will be some amount of hindrances still present. But obviously, this is the goal that we should have. We should strive to abandon those hindrances. And if we are actually able to do that, then we can practice metta or any of the other Brahma Viharas to the full extent as the Buddha describes it here. If we have hindrances present, obviously the metta will not be as strong because the hindrances will weaken the metta. We can't single-mindedly practice metta because the hindrances are also there in the mind. So there are multiple things present at the same time. So the metta is not going to be as strong. But if we are able to overcome the hindrances, obviously the metta is going to be so much stronger. And so we notice that the Buddha doesn't talk about spreading metta to any particular person. He doesn't talk about loved ones and neutral persons and enemies. He doesn't talk about people in the same room or people in the same village or the same town or the same country or whatever. The Buddha just says that your heart is entirely full of this emotion of metta. And then you just spread that metta around in limitless in all directions. So the problem with practicing metta in the way it is usually taught, if we pick a particular person, either ourselves or another person, is that we still have all these barriers in our mind. We have these discriminations in our mind. We still, there's one single person that we direct metta to, and then all the other beings are kind of left out. So obviously we have to start somewhere. We can't just start with the fully fledged metta and have metta towards everybody and all beings at all times, entirely limitless. Of course, this is a practice path, which is why the later commentaries have developed all these methods. But the Buddha obviously talks about the final goal. The Buddha tries to inspire us here and show us what is possible in terms of metta practice. So he's talking about the highest possible stage of the metta here. And so he says, well, without making any discriminations, without focusing on any specific person, not yourself and not others, just open your heart and let the metta feeling flow. And let it flow in one direction first, then to the second, the third, and the fourth. So you can do that in any way you want. You can start directing it to the north, then to the east, to the south, to the west, or start wherever you like. When you sit down, you can direct it to the front, then to one side, to the back, and to the other side. So just go around in a circle. Whichever way feels convenient. If you don't know where the north is or the south is or whatever, you don't have to worry about that. You just go, cover all directions around you. And then, of course, go to the space below you, go to the space above you, so that, there's a whole circle of metta forming around you, and then flowing limitless in all directions. So as the Buddha says here, across, everywhere, all around. They spread a heart full of metta to the whole world. So when the heart is really open, then there are no more boundaries in the heart. And then the metta is unlimited. Then we don't direct it to any specific being. We can't direct it to any specific being, in fact, because once we direct it to a specific being, we're kind of setting up boundaries again. We are making a difference, a distinction between one being and another being, and we're only letting it flow to one being and not to the others. So when we do that, then our heart can't be fully open because we have set those boundaries. But if we let all these boundaries dissolve, then the heart can really, really open up and just flow freely in all directions. And that, of course, is the end goal of metta practice. And as the Buddha says here, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. And so this is also important, free of enmity and ill will. So obviously, metta practice is the exact opposite of enmity or ill will, because enmity or ill will means that we want to harm another being, that we have negative feelings towards another being. But of course, this cannot coexist together with metta, because metta is the exact opposite. So if our metta is really, really strong, necessarily ill will have to dissolve. So this is why it helps us to overcome this hindrance of ill will. And maybe something that you have seen before when you read this standard passage translated by other teachers is that where Bhante Sujato translates as everywhere, all around, other teachers have translated this as to all as to oneself. And so in that case, again, that would mean you think about other beings and you think about yourself. And so you again start off making that distinction between you and other people, and eventually dissolving that distinction so that the metta feeling just flows limitlessly, both to yourself and to others. This is not the way that Bhante Sujato has translated it here, as you can see. And the reason why there is this discrepancy here is that we actually have different versions of the Pali text preserved from different Buddhist countries. And there are spelling variants here. And there is a tiny, tiny variance, just a difference in one single letter. And depending on which manuscript you follow, that either means to all as to oneself, or it can mean everywhere, all around. So the manuscripts don't agree with each other, and so the translators have to make a choice which manuscript they follow. And so for that reason, we can sometimes see different translations here. For the actual practice of metta, it doesn't really make a difference, because whether you think it's to all as to yourself or to everywhere, all around, the idea is exactly the same. The metta just flows limitlessly to like to any kind of space in the universe, in the world. So this is the idea of how to practice metta once it has fully developed. And we can see when this happens, when the heart is fully open, when the metta just flows limitlessly, then this is a state where we have no more attachment to any specific thing in the world. The mind has completely opened up. And for that reason, we often say that the Brahmaviharas, when fully developed to this extent, they are equivalent to a jhana state. So we can use those Brahmaviharas to actually enter jhana proper, or we can enter a state that is equivalent to a jhana through the practice of the Brahmaviharas. And for those of you who have been around for a while, for the sutta classes that I do on Tuesday, you might remember that a little while ago, we read the Atthakkanagara Sutta. And in the Atthakkanagara Sutta, it's more well known as the sutta that talks about the 11 doors to the deathless. And in this sutta about the 11 doors to the deathless, the Venerable Ananda talks about 11 stages in meditation that we can use as a basis for the breakthrough to arahantship, so to full liberation. And those 11 doors are the 4 jhanas, the first 3 of the 4 immaterial realms, and the 4 Brahmaviharas. And so there often comes up the question, how come the Brahmaviharas are in there? How come the Brahmaviharas can be used as a basis for breakthrough to arahantship? And the reason is that if we develop the Brahmaviharas to this extremely high level, when the heart is completely open, then that samadhi that comes from this state is equivalent to a jhana. And because it is so strong and equivalent to a jhana, we can use the samadhi, the concentration that we get from that, to develop wisdom and insight and to make that breakthrough to arahantship. And so for that reason, metta practice can be really, really powerful and can lead to very, very deep samadhi stages. So this is the standard passage, the standard description in the suttas, how Brahmaviharas were practiced in the Buddha's time. As you can see, this is a very high level of practice, so this might be difficult to do in the beginning stages. And obviously for that reason, later tradition has developed all these other methods that teachers teach nowadays. However, we also have another sutta, the very well-known Karaniya Metasuta, the Metta Sutta that people chant all the time in monasteries and also in lay groups, and that most people from traditional Buddhist countries will know by heart. Even small children will know this by heart. And in that sutta, the Buddha also gives very specific teachings of how to develop metta. And so that sutta is also very interesting, and it gives a step-by-step training path of how to develop metta practice from the beginning stages to the breakthrough to arahantship. So that sutta is also very fascinating, very interesting. And so this is the second sutta that I want to read with you today. So let me post the link for you in the live chat. So hopefully that has worked and you should be able to see the link there. And I have given you the link to the Amaravati translation of this sutta. And the reason why I have picked the Amaravati translation is that the Amaravati translation is really, really well known. A lot of people know this by heart. This is chanted all over the world. And if you know this sutta by heart, or if you know parts of this sutta by heart, that is really helpful in your meditation practice. If you're going through a tough spot in your meditation, you can't really focus properly, the metta doesn't seem to want to develop, it just doesn't want to flow, you feel a little bit frustrated. If you know the sutta by heart, then you can start reciting it in your head while you're trying to meditate, and you can recollect all these qualities that I mentioned there, and you can get some inspiration. So memorizing the sutta and knowing it by heart is really, really helpful. And since many people know the Amaravati version, I have decided that we will use this one for our Dhamma talk today. So, hopefully you have found the link and have found the sutta. And this is the sutta about the Buddha's words on loving kindness. And the sutta starts, "This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace." So the sutta is very practical. It gives us a step-by-step approach. And it says, the sutta is for somebody who is following the path of peace. So the path towards Nibbana, the path of Buddhist practice, the path where we go into deeper and deeper inner contentment, inner stillness, and of course, inner peace. And also it is somebody who is interested in developing what is translated here as goodness, in developing wholesome states. So of course, again, it is a practice. It is not something that we do once and then it is done. It is a habit pattern of the mind that we have to train over a long period of time. And so somebody who wants to undertake this training, who wants to develop their metta practice, for those people, the Buddha suggests the following. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied. So, the Buddha mentions a few qualities here that can be developed or that should be and need to be developed for somebody who wants to practice metta. And at first, maybe it might seem like this has not that much to do with metta practice, but actually these are the basics. This is the foundation for our metta practice. So it looks like this has nothing to do with meditation, and really it doesn't have much to do with meditation at this point. So when we want to develop metta practice and our practice isn't very strong yet, then this is something that we have to do 24 hours a day in our daily life, not only on the cushion, but also off the cushion, whenever we get the chance, whenever we interact with other people, and even when we are alone, then we at least interact with ourselves, with our own mind. So metta practice is really something that also needs to be done off the cushion in order to make any kind of progress. So the Buddha suggests they should be able and upright. So able means being capable in what they're doing. Upright, obviously, upright, straightforward. This means that we're honest people. We are not trying to deceive others. When we say something, we say what we mean. We are not trying to cause harm. And people can just rely on us. Like, we are reliable people. We are honest, straightforward people. This is the kind of basis for metta practice. If we are trying to deceive others, then obviously we are trying to harm them. And obviously this would directly counteract any kind of metta practice that we are trying to do on the cushion. So those very simple foundations of ethical behavior, of virtue, of right speech and right action need to be very strong in order for our metta practice to develop. So we can see here, right speech is very important, not lying, being straightforward, being reliable, not speaking deceptively, not speaking divisively, and also not speaking in harsh ways is really, really important. As the Buddha here also says, being gentle in speech is one of the foundations of metta practice. And of course, when we do this, it's quite easy to see that this will lead to relationships with other people that are much more harmonious than they would be otherwise. So this lies a very good foundation for goodwill towards each other, and having goodwill towards other people obviously is very conducive to creating this habit pattern in the mind and then to creating a strong metta practice. Goodwill obviously is the basis for metta practice. Goodwill basically is metta practice. It just needs to develop more. And also, it's not just about talking with other people, it's also about our inner monologue, the way we talk to ourselves. If we constantly put ourselves down, and if we constantly feel that we are not good enough, and we are scolding ourselves and we are pushing ourselves around, then obviously that is also not being gentle in speech. because we are not being gentle towards ourselves in speech. So then that might be a really good training ground for us in order to develop our metta more. So if we have this habit of constantly putting ourselves down, then it's very difficult to develop metta. So then that might be something to work on first. And then the Buddha also says you should be humble, not conceited. Of course, if you're humble and not conceited, that makes it much easier for other people to interact with you. You're not going to push them around. You're not going to try to control them. You're an approachable person. You're an easygoing person, somebody who doesn't scare other people. So other people will be much more comfortable being around you. And again, that is very conducive to harmonious relations with the people around you. And this harmonious foundation in your daily life is really important for the development of inner peace and inner happiness. And of course, not being conceited, so being humble and not conceited, this also helps us on the development on the path. Of course, this helps us making progress towards realizing non-self, making progress towards stream entry, because at stream entry we realize or we have to break this fetter of personality view. So if we have a very, very conceited mind, letting go of personality view is obviously very difficult because our ego will be very strong. If we are not conceited and humble, then that breakthrough to stream entry, or later even to arahantship, where we let go of all kind of attachments to any kind of self in any kind of state, will be so much easier. So, and Buddha also says you should be contented and easily satisfied. That is also very important. A mind that is contented, that is easily satisfied, will not constantly go around and find fault and criticize everything, criticize other people, or criticize yourself, or criticize the surroundings. And so the mind doesn't constantly generate ill will and negativity towards the situation or towards other people. And of course, if the mind creates ill will, that is the exact opposite of metta. So making a conscious effort to be contented and easily satisfied is again one of the foundational practices to develop metta later on. So then the Buddha continues and he says, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. So the Buddha continues and says, somebody who really wants to develop on the path, wants to develop metta practice, should be fairly unburdened with duties. So that means having a calm life, a peaceful life. Of course, everybody has to do some duties. Life has to be sustained somehow. Even in monastic life, there are quite a few duties that have to be done in a monastery. But it shouldn't be so much that we're constantly overwhelmed and constantly stressed out and just rushing from one thing to the next. Because if we're too overwhelmed and too rushing, then obviously we don't have the time to look after our inner well-being. And we don't have the time to do things mindfully and to do things calmly. And if the mind is constantly agitated because we're doing too many things, then our practice cannot develop smoothly. And then again, the Buddha says to be frugal in one's ways. Being frugal, again, is quite similar to being contented, to being easily satisfied. It means that we don't have that many attachments to the sensual things around us, to the material possessions around us. We don't constantly run after new things. We try to make do with what we already have. We try to be content with what we already have. So that also conduces to a calm and peaceful lifestyle, but it also is very helpful to reduce sensual desire in our mind. So while metta practice usually is used as an antidote for ill will, it can also be helpful to some extent for overcoming other hindrances, such as sensual desire. And then the Buddha says peaceful and calm. We've already talked about that, how peace and calmness will help us so much for our meditation practice and for the development of wholesome mind states and for wishing well to yourself and to other beings. And of course, being wise and skillful. So that is very important. especially being skillful. So being skillful can apply in so many different ways. The most important here, of course, is being skillful in Dhamma practice. So especially understanding what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, which kind of actions create good karma, which kind of actions create bad karma, and then wisely choosing the appropriate course of action. So if you're skillful enough and you're mindful enough, then when you get into a bad situation, then you're not going to engage in that kind of action. You can avoid getting angry. You can avoid doing unwholesome things. You can avoid letting your mind or your body stray into unwholesome territory. So this kind of skillfulness in Dhamma teachings, in what is beneficial and wholesome, is extremely important for metta practice. But also on a more mundane level, being skillful or being skilled in so many things can really support your metta practice. So as we have seen so far, metta practice is something we practice in daily life to begin with. We don't start practicing this on the cushion. We start doing this in our daily life, having a quiet life, helping others, wishing them well, creating positive relationships with the people around us. And one way to do that is to help each other. So in monasteries, for example, the principle of dana is very important. And dana, giving, doesn't just mean giving financial support, but it also means helping out in the community, doing all the various kind of services, coming together as a Dhamma community to practice together and to keep your Dhamma center or your monastery running. That can, and to keep a center running, so many different skills are required, from cooking to cleaning, to gardening, to repairs, to handiwork, to computer skills, to video editing skills. So many different skills are helpful. And many monastics or many new people who come into a monastery and want to become monastics, they're quite surprised at the amount of like worldly skills that they will need to know and that they will need to learn. So many people think when they come to a monastery, they will just need to learn how to meditate. But actually, most people, when they come to a monastery, they'll learn how to use like a wide range of different tools, because so many things need to be repaired and they do so many different kinds of works. And all of this is metta practice in action, because this creates an environment for yourself and for others where they can practice Dhamma and you can make your contribution, create good karma, helping out. And this, all these kind of actions, like these physical actions, create so many positive feelings in your mind, so many skillful mind states, and all of this can be used for developing metta practice. So this metta in action in your daily life is extremely helpful for later practicing in meditation. And then the Buddha also says they should not be proud or demanding in nature. We've already talked about this when we talked about being humble and not conceited, and also when we talked about being contented and easily satisfied. So obviously, if you're contented and easily satisfied, you cannot be demanding in nature. And if you're humble, then you cannot be proud at the same time. So we've already talked about how these qualities are really important. And then the Buddha says, let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. So again, this ties into the idea that you really need to be wise and skillful. You need to understand what is beneficial, what is not beneficial. And once you see what is not beneficial, then don't engage in this. Even if you think, oh, it's so trifling, it's such a small thing, even the slightest thing can really throw your mind off balance and can cause a big disturbance in your mind, because later you will feel remorse and you wish that you wouldn't have done that. So it's better just to refrain from this from the start. So out of kindness towards yourself, out of metta towards yourself, don't do unwholesome things, because this will just create more suffering and more problems for you later. So this is really also metta practice in action. Metta towards yourself, kindness towards yourself requires that you develop this skill so you can protect yourself. And of course, then wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. this is probably something that people associate directly with metta practice. So finally, at this point, we start developing these mental aspects of metta practice. May all beings be at ease, wishing well towards yourself and others. So far, we've mostly talked about things that can be done in daily life and that should be developed in daily life. So all these foundational practices should be put into practice first, or you should train in this first before metta practice in meditation really can take off. So as you can see there, even for people who don't have that much luck in their meditation or who feel like metta is really difficult for them to develop, usually that is because the foundational practices have not been done. So then it's really good to look at what can you do in your daily life to strengthen the calmness, the peace, the harmony in your life, so that you will feel a sense of well-being, a sense of ease in your daily life. And from that, it's so much easier to develop the metta in your mind. And now the Buddha kind of moves on from these external trainings to how we practice in the meditation itself. And so the Buddha then continues. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. So, of course, this is the way we usually think about metta. We wish happiness to all beings. And again, we see the Buddha doesn't talk about enemies and friends and neutral persons, because that all of that would create distinctions in the mind. The Buddha just says, may all beings be at ease. And this is the way that he suggests that we practice. So we can go through different categories of beings, the way he is doing it here, weak and strong, and of different sizes, visible and invisible, close to us and far away, and even beings that haven't been reborn yet, that are in some kind of in-between state. So we can just open our mind towards all of these different beings. And sometimes in the beginning stages, it can be helpful to think about these different categories of beings, just so that our mind starts to open up, so that our mind becomes boundless and limitless. But we need to take care not to erect like barriers and just think about one category, or think about, those are the categories that the Buddha mentions, and maybe we think about beings that aren't mentioned here, so those shouldn't be included or something. So then we would be practicing wrong. The easiest way to practice metta, obviously, is just radiating it out in the universe without visualizing specific beings. And then the Buddha continues and he says, let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. So I think this is quite self-explanatory. We have already talked about deceiving others in the beginning, and that is why the Buddha started off the entire sutta by saying that you need to be straightforward. Because obviously if we deceive others, we cause harm. They will be very disappointed. They might incur some kind of suffering because of our deception. Or if we despise other beings, obviously the same problem. They will feel very hurt. And of course, we've already mentioned, if anger and ill will are present in the mind, metta practice cannot be particularly strong. So once metta practice becomes really, really strong, anger and ill will are being dissolved because they cannot coexist together, because they are polar opposites of each other. And then the famous line about the mother and her child. So the Buddha says, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. So again, the Buddha says you have to make your heart boundless, to make it really, really open, to remove all boundaries that are there between you, yourself, and others. You should cherish all living beings and just radiate kindness towards the entire world without making any distinctions. And again, not just in the 4 directions around you, but also upwards to the skies, downwards to the depths. Just a big kind of sphere of metta that just sort of limitlessly includes the entire universe, basically. So in the same way that a mother even would sacrifice her own life to protect another being, in the same way, so the mother doesn't hold back. The mother doesn't make a reservation like, I'm only giving that much, but that much I'm keeping for myself. She's willing to give everything she has, including her own life. In the same way, we shouldn't hold back when we develop metta. We should just open our entire heart without like keeping something back for ourselves. In the same way, metta only becomes like perfect if the heart is really able to fully open up. And then the Buddha says, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. So again, the Buddha says, whether walking or standing or seated or lying down, so in all postures, we need to sustain this perception of goodwill towards all beings. So again, the Buddha says, this isn't something we just practice on the meditation cushion. This is something we practice 24/7, all throughout our life. And if metta practice is really, really perfect, then we will maintain this state of metta, this open-heartedness towards all beings, including ourselves, at any point in our time, whether we're meditating or not, whether we're doing something else entirely. This metta practice will be the underlying emotional sort of presence in our life. And if we are able to do that, to just live out of this state of metta throughout our entire life, then this is said to be the sublime abiding. So again, we see how this kind of ties in with the jhanas, because jhanas are also called the sublime abidings, because they're really, really pleasant states. If we live out of metta the whole time, that would be obviously a really, really pleasant kind of life, a really pleasant mind to have, and very positive feelings that we would experience if we were to live this way. So again, we see how it makes the mind boundless, how it is equivalent to a jhana state. And for that reason, it can take us very, very far on the Buddhist path. And then in the last stanza of this Metta Sutta, the Buddha says, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted ones, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, are not born again into this world. So now suddenly in the last stanza, the Buddha introduces this idea of not holding on to fixed views. So far with metta practice, you can get into jhana, or you can get into an equivalent of jhana. So you can get into very, very deep concentration or deep states of samadhi, deep states of stillness, if you don't like the word concentration. But for a breakthrough to higher stages, especially to arahantship, concentration or samadhi alone is not enough. So we also need to develop wisdom. So this is what the Buddha kind of talks about here, not holding on to fixed views, being flexible, having the wisdom of seeing these attachments that might still linger in the mind, especially attachments to views, because attachments to sensual things we have already overcome. So this is kind of the last kind of attachments we still have that we need to let go in order to make that breakthrough to arahantship. So in addition to the metta practice, now we also need to develop wisdom to overcome this last bit of attachments to views. In that case, we are pure-hearted because we have metta, and we have clarity of vision because we have developed that wisdom. We are also free from all sense desires. I've talked a little bit about this in the beginning, how metta can also help us to overcome attachments to sense desires, not only to hatred. And if we can do that, then we are not born again into this world, which means we have become arahants, or at least anagamis, and we have walked the Buddhist path to the very end based on this metta practice, and we have become fully liberated. So here in this sutta, the Metta Sutta, the Buddha really gives us the entire sort of scope of metta practice from the very beginnings, practicing right speech, being a trustworthy, reliable person, creating harmonious relationships with the people around us through sort of deeper and deeper stages of meditation until we reach absorption or jhana, and we make breakthroughs to the noble attainments such as arahantship. The Buddha here gives the whole range of practice of metta. And maybe you have noticed that this is somewhat different from how metta is often taught in modern times, where the preliminary practices are a little bit neglected maybe, or not talked about much, or at least not talked about in terms of metta practice. They might be talked about in terms of the 5 precepts or of ethical behavior, things like that, but they're not often talked about in terms of metta practice. And sometimes it's difficult for people to make that connection, how that actually is metta practice towards themselves and to others in a preliminary form. But of course, these are very, very important foundations. And if people struggle with metta in their meditation, then sometimes those foundations aren't strong enough yet. And this is something that people might want to pay a little bit more attention to. So this is how the Buddha envisioned that metta should be practiced and should be developed over time. And I think for now, since time is a little bit advanced already, we can finish the sutta discussion. And if you have any questions, then please post them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So there is somebody called Faizi, and they have a question, but it doesn't relate to metta practice. So we're just going to answer this very briefly. Can I introduce them to books for beginners or proper reading? So I recommend that people start reading suttas. One really good book is written by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's an anthology of suttas. It's called In the Buddha's Words, I think. Let me get the book and show you. So this is what the book looks like, In the Buddha's Words. Gives a really, really nice introduction, and I think that is a really good starting point. And then next question is somebody called Sumitra, and they're asking, why do we need Vipassana and how can we practice it? So today we're not talking about Vipassana in too much detail. We need Vipassana because Vipassana is the method that develops wisdom, and wisdom is what cuts through our defilements and enables us to let go of the fetters and break through to arahantship. So Vipassana is really, really important, but also at the same time, samatha is also important. Developing mental calm or concentration or samadhi is also really important. So both samatha and Vipassana are needed to make progress on the path. But Vipassana specifically develops wisdom and insight. So that is what breaks through, what cuts through the fetters and cuts through the defilements. So we can practice that by developing our wisdom in whatever way we can, reading sutras, doing recollections, doing contemplations, and especially trying to really have that experience for ourselves of the 3 characteristics, which is anicca, impermanence, dukkha, or suffering, and anatta, non-self. So this is like the wisdom that we eventually need to develop and that we need to see for ourselves. And that is basically what Buddhist practice is all about. And then Sud has a question, and they say, is it accurate to say mind of metta is the same as right intention from the Noble Eightfold Path? Also, is it stronger to develop metta while in activity rather than in meditation, since meditation is easy, but acting with metta amidst activity is difficult? So, metta and right intention obviously are similar. Right intention is a little bit broader. So right intention also does include goodwill towards others, but it also includes things like renunciation and so on. So it has, like, it's a little, the focus isn't quite as narrow. In metta practice, we really just try to develop loving kindness or goodwill towards ourselves and others, and unlimited just towards the entire universe. Is it stronger to develop metta while in activity? Like, usually in activity, we focus on the thing that we are doing now. So the kind of metta that we develop in activity, especially if we are beginners and we haven't developed it to the jhana level yet, is kind of, we develop metta maybe to ourselves, maybe to other people around us, maybe to the situation we are in at that particular moment, maybe towards the activity that we are doing in that moment. So metta can be very focused on that one thing, but it wouldn't usually be limitless towards the entire universe. Because while we are doing activities, we need to focus on the activity that we are doing. I'm glad that you think in meditation it is easy. That's a very good sign, but some people find it quite difficult in meditation also. And I think the two kind of reinforce each other. If you do it in your meditation, you create a habit pattern in the mind, then it is also more easy to do it in daily life. But also if you cultivate it in daily life, that will also reinforce your meditation practice, because most people maybe meditate half an hour a day, 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day. I don't know how much people meditate. But the activities they do in daily life is usually many more hours a day than what they actually spend meditating. So if you obviously can practice it during all the other hours every day, then the habit that you create in your mind, or you cultivate in your mind, will become much stronger than if you just do it in your meditation. So I think both kinds of practice can just reinforce each other. And it will vary from person to person which one they find easier and which one they find is their stronger practice. Okay, then Buddha Ruchi has left 3 comments. I'm not sure if there's a question. Let's see. It occurs to me, the first noble truth, being suffering in a total universal sense, all beings suffer, and so one can wish them out of suffering, but also giving thought to the noble truth. Further, the 5 aggregates remind us on no self, impermanence, and no separation between self and other. Thus, meditation on the aggregates leads to understanding that may I be happy is no different from may all beings be happy. I'd like to hear what you might think about these thoughts of mine. So, yes, I think that's a very important thought. But also not to be too confused, because the reflections that you're doing now, they're obviously there to develop wisdom, which is very, very important. And but with metta practice, what we mainly are doing is developing samatha, or samadhi, concentration, or deep stillness of the mind. And sometimes it's best to focus on either vipassana or samatha meditations, especially in the beginning, because otherwise the mind gets a little bit confused, and then neither of the two methods kind of works properly. Sometimes people also have this kind of aversion towards metta practice because they don't like saying phrases like may I be happy, because they think ultimately there's no I. So I'm reinforcing this wrong view of a self when there actually is no self, and so on. So it's kind of sometimes can be quite helpful to keep the two like Vipassana practice and Samatha practice a little bit apart. So when we do metta practice, we just do metta practice. We just create this feeling of wishing other beings and ourselves well, of sending this kindness towards the universe all around us, without worrying too much about like picking it all apart and sort of developing wisdom at the same time. So doing these reflections is really, really important, but it's good to do that at a different time when we are not practicing metta. Just so that we can really focus on the feeling while we are practicing metta. But obviously, as you say, like in the end, there is no separation between us and other beings, since we and other beings are just like notions we create in our mind. Ultimately, they're only the 5 aggregates. Everything are impersonal processes. And so that's also why we shouldn't create all these boundaries between us and other beings. And we should just, radiate metta into like the universe around us, because ultimately this idea of us and other beings is a wrong idea anyway. And if we can just send metta to anything that is around us, that idea sort of doesn't block off our wisdom or doesn't counteract our wisdom, because we don't create this idea of beings. And Sunya Anagarika says, the bit with the mother protecting a child has always been confusing to me. As a mother, I have experienced the instinctive drive to protect my child, but this state is very far from metta. It is more like berserker rage. And she continues and says, Thanissaro has explained that it is one's metta practice that is to be protected. My thoughts. Yeah, so I think we have to be very careful with this particular passage to understand it properly, because obviously a mother's love towards a child is also full of attachment. So it is not the pure metta that we want to cultivate. But what I understand this passage to mean is that a mother wouldn't hold back. She would even put her own life, like what the Buddha is saying here. She even puts her own life on the line in order to protect the other being. In the same way, we don't hold back when we practice metta. So we are willing to open our entire heart to include everything, the entire universe. So what I think this line means is, don't hold back when you're practicing metta. Don't reserve a portion of the metta for yourself or for beings that you're attached to. Just practice as much metta as you can, and don't try to be protective of some portion of yourself. And so what happens when we practice metta to this high degree that the Buddha describes, when we really open up our heart, is that the boundaries between ourselves and others dissolve. And that can be very kind of challenging, and it can be a little bit scary, because it feels like we are dissolving and we are no longer there. And this, because we're so attached to this idea of I and of ourself, when suddenly that boundary around our personality dissolves and disappears, and we see it's actually just fake and it's actually just an illusion, that can be really scary. And what I think the Buddha encourages us here is to not be scared and to overcome this hurdle and to just give it our all and to just really release into the metta, and not try to maintain those boundaries in our heart, even though that can be very scary. When the notion of self dissolves for the first time. So in the same way, the mother doesn't hold back. We also shouldn't hold back and try to preserve our own self or our own being. And of course, that is a state in the meditation. It doesn't mean that we like physically put ourselves in danger, or that we kill ourselves, or that we hurt ourselves. It's really about the inner development about the dissolving of those boundaries that our mind creates between ourselves and others. That's how I understand the passage anyway. Then there's another question. Any tips on making meditation a daily practice, as I get distracted as a layperson? Much gratitude. Well, it's important to reflect wisely on your life and to make good choices. So if you have trouble having a daily meditation practice, then obviously you need to set priorities in such a way that you have the time to actually do it. So maybe you want to schedule it in your planner. Make sure every day half an hour is blocked off where there is no other appointment and no other thing happening, so that you actually have the time to sit down and to do the meditation. And so just being organized and planning your life in such a way you have the time is very important. Sometimes having a peer group can be helpful. Going to a specific place to practice with other people can be helpful. If you don't have other people to practice with, just doing it virtually on the internet, doing a guided meditation or joining a virtual group can be helpful, doing it on Zoom. But really the main thing is the mindset, so that you're clear this is important to you and you're going to make time for this. And so that you yourself choose your priorities. And if other things come up, you realize this isn't as important as my meditation practice. So I'm now going to let the other things go and focus on my meditation. And what most people do is they let the meditation go and focus on all the other things. But if you realize what is important to you, then you focus on the meditation and not the other things. So I think that was the last question for today. So for now, we can finish with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a good day and have a good rest of the week. And I will see you all next Tuesday.